Welcome to the 94th episode of Dialogika, a podcast between two friends about the latest in society, politics, and feminism in Indonesia and the world. I'm Stephanie Tangkilisan.
And I'm Swedian Lee.
And this week we are continuing our conversation with Amir Jones, and we're going to continue talking about structural racism and how defunding the police is a really important part of how we move forward in society.
This is part of our greater conversation that we began in part 1 in last week's episode, where we talked about Black Lives Matter and the reaction to George Floyd's murder, as well as Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and countless other African-Americans in America. If you haven't listened to part 1 of this conversation, please take a listen, and we hope that our conversation with Amir will not only shed some light into the situation around structural racism and the complicated foundations that underpin a lot of institutions in America. Especially as media attention on this issue is dying down, we need to keep talking about it, and we need to keep raising our voice in order to make some real change happen.
So, here's to it.
I mean, you brought up the Defund the Police aspect of the movement as well. I think that's also, at least from here in Indonesia, that was one of the things that got a lot of attention.
Oh, really?
In some communities, right? In the sense that because I think a lot of people who are trying to understand the Black Lives Matter scenario in the States, here in Asia, might espouse the same views that some people in the States do, where it's like the police is... like, you can't touch that, right? Like, you what do you mean by defund the police? Are you saying like there's gonna be like chaos in the streets now? Like, trying to unpack that a little bit, because I think that's a lot of default views on that phrase is that sort of understanding.
They're like,
right?
okay, a lot of Indonesians are like, okay, Black Lives Matter, but why defund the police, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
An important conversation that needs to happen right now, and I think it's starting to, is what does defunding the police mean?
Yeah.
And it means different things to different people depending on what you support, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't support fully abolishing police departments. I think that in many situations, police do provide, safety and security for communities. However, what we need to focus on is how much money police departments are getting in contrast to other services that actually serve the community, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of cities and towns, police departments are drastically funded so much more than housing services, than the education system, different mental health and public health resources. And that is where the defund the police conversation started.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of people are saying defund the police, but they don't mean fully defunding the police. They mean, let's take some of the money that is going towards the police department and invest it in different social services so that we don't need more police in the community. Because if you invest housing, in education, in these services that actually provide opportunities for people to create a sustainable life for themselves, you will see crime decrease. You will see less phone calls to 911 to the police officers when you see, someone with mental health issues on the street, right? And be acting, kind of odd. They, you may think that they're a threat, but really this is just someone on the street who has mental health issues, and that needs to be addressed, or substance abuse issues, and that needs to be addressed. But that does not mean that we need police in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think defund the police may have not been the best terminology,
Mm-hmm.
because it makes you think that a lot of people want police departments to be fully abolished. Some people do, but a lot of people don't. What a lot of people, again, what they want is take some of the money that's going towards police departments, invest it in other forms of, social services,
Right.
that we don't have as many police officers and we don't have as many Black people being killed by police officers.
it's just lessening that interaction level as well. And like, I think what people kind of forget is like just how much police budgets have increased over like the last few decades in a time where like crime in America has like dropped significantly.
Yeah.
I've actually had this argument with a friend who was like, like the police are important. And then, like looking at evidence, it's like actually the number of police, it's really questionable when you look at the number of police in particular cities and like having defunded it, if crime went down or not. Like increased police presence does not mean a deterrence to crime that people think it provides.
I also think like, when you actually reprioritize the budget, right, so that you're not just saying, oh, an active police force is the only solution to all of society's problems, you actually will also make the police better, in my opinion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because then you also get the kind of people who want to be part of the police force and trying to do this job to be aware that this is not the only solution, that I don't have to resort to these measures, that these measures are only for specific situations. And we can actually prevent the kind of things that have, brought this whole thing into attention right now, right? Like the murders that happened. That's because of such an over-reliance on police force as the solution to everything.
Yeah, I mean, all of these points are super important in the conversation. And I think, like we mentioned, you can look at a budget and determine what the society is prioritizing, right? So, in a lot of cases, there are a lot of instances when there's so much unnecessary police presence in situations that don't require police, and that's how you end up having a lot of situations where Black and brown people are harmed by the police.
For sure.
In general, we need to continue this conversation about reimagining what role policing takes in our communities. We need to be prioritizing housing for homeless people.
Right.
Like, we shouldn't have homeless people on the streets in the wealthiest nation in the world, right? And part of that is because these decisions are made at the local level. And again, I will like drill this time and time again, like local elections is vital to the sustainability of this movement of Black Lives Matter, right? And so that's definitely a focus. But yeah, we need to have more conversations about what defund the police actually means.
Yeah, it's a big topic, but it's like when I was filming my last documentary, I spent a lot of time in a poor Black community, and I've never seen so much police presence in my life. Like, it was just everywhere. Like, and all of the people I talked to, like all the young Black men that were my subjects and eventually became my friends, it was like everyone has been stopped. Like, it would just be like, I saw them next week and they were like, oh yeah, I got pulled over again. Like, that was in the Bronx where you're not supposed to be stopped and frisked now. And it was just like a constant like, oh yeah, this happened again. They were frustrated, and obviously like, but it was just like such a constant thing. And it's just like, I think people don't understand the level of over-policing in certain communities, and how also that the level of like that happening to the same people over time can sometimes,
that's trauma right there,
result in like people being mad, and this is an accumulation of a life living.
Right. And that trauma is real for so many Black people in this nation. And I think something that another glaring reality is that the vast majority, I don't have the exact numbers, but the vast majority of incarcerated people are incarcerated because of nonviolent crimes, right?
Yep.
If you look at the segment of those nonviolent crimes that are related to drug issues, there are two sides to that. There's like the substance abuse side, but there are also, the drug dealing side of things. And it's like, let's ask the questions of why so many people have substance abuse problems, and why so many people resort to selling drugs to create a life for themselves. And it goes back to these structural racist institutions in the US. Like, people are in those situations because of racism and because of marginalization. And I think when we ask those questions, we start to see these quote unquote offenders as victims of the system. And I think that's where a lot of the conversation needs to be at, in order to actually undo a lot of these things that are preventing Black and brown people from being able to access opportunity.
Like the war on drugs, for example, right? Like, and what is considered a serious enough, like drug crime, for example, nonviolent drug crime leads to the incarceration of Black people. But like serious financial crimes or even rape, like Brock Turner or the Wall Street guys who like did real tangible damage are not punished as severely. So it's like, what is considered crime is also like racist, and how punishment is being distributed is super racist.
And so, all of this is to say, like, this is why people are talking about not only defunding the police and reallocating a lot of those resources to different social services, but also let's take a look at our prison and our industrial prison complex in this country, right? And what does it look like for Black people in the prison system once they're how they're treated in the system, which is basically like animals, and what it looks like for them after they get out of prison. Like you mentioned earlier, you lose your right to vote, you lose access to a lot of resources, you're unable to obtain jobs because of your criminal record, and that's why you see like ban the box initiatives, ban the box on job applications that force you to identify yourself with a criminal record. From the employer standpoint, people argue, you want to have a safer work environment. You don't want to hire an ex-convict. Well, how in the world are they supposed to create a life for themselves after they get out if they can't get hired?
It's also like, okay, you don't know, but that goes into like, you don't know which white man has raped a person and like didn't get punished for it, and then that's the person you're letting in versus someone who had different life circumstances. I don't know. It's just
yeah, exactly. And and then that's why you see like recidivism rates that are very high, because once people get out of prison, they can't create a life for themselves and they end up falling back into the traps that they did originally. And I read Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson recently, and he's a career you could say civil rights, criminal justice attorney, and he touches on a lot of the death row inmates that he represented, and he was able to overturn a lot of these wrongful convictions because a lot of these Black men that are on death row were wrongly convicted for crimes they didn't commit, and they're about to be put to death and executed by the state when they were wrongly convicted in the first place. A lot of times it was because of the color of their skin. Like, that's just another facet of all of these racist systems that we've been talking about. But I definitely recommend reading Just Mercy. It's a great book.
Totally. What are some of the other books you'd recommend reading?
So I think I'm a huge James Baldwin fan. I finished The Fire Next Time, and it kind of talks about James Baldwin and his perspective and experiences growing up as a poor Black kid in New York. And it touches on the lived experiences of someone who has confronted these racist systems in America. I think 13th is a great documentary. It talks about the 13th Amendment, which still allows slavery to be legal as long as someone is incarcerated, right? And there are so many other books that I think can paint a better picture of these systems for people, for people who don't really understand. And I think there's a lot of documentary watching and reading that the community needs to do.
I think this is definitely a time for all of us to like reflect on ourselves, reflect on our own actions, and see not only what we can do to impact change, but also not just change in the capital C sense of the word, but also just like little things that you can do, right, to educate yourself. And what I've discovered as well is that this is not a sprint, right? It's going to be a marathon.
Mm-hmm.
You have to do the little things that you think is painful, is hard, it's not making as much of a change as I want it to be in order to get to the change that you want to actually make, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think just reminding ourselves of that.
And I think it's like, even for us, it's like to constantly learn and be okay with the fact that like you may be biased like by the way you were brought up, and like how do you unlearn that, like, you know, from the moment when I was like 18, 19 when I first learned it, and now when I'm 29, I'm still learning about these issues and like constantly trying to learn and like improve myself and unlearn things, or just learn things in general. Like, it's not a process where like, okay, I'm done, I'm an anti-racist now, like,
right.
I'm an ally. It's like it's always like you're an aspiring ally and you can always get better and be better.
And change and progress, they don't follow a linear path. There are steps forward and steps backward. In 2013, for example, I was interning for the NAACP in DC, almost exactly 7 years ago, standing on the steps of the Supreme Court, waiting for the decision in which the court rolled back a provision of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that required states with the most egregious histories of racial discrimination to get clearances before they make changes to their voting laws. And like, that's from the more from at like the top level, like an example of steps backwards that happened, but that doesn't mean we didn't take 10 steps forward as well, right?
Right.
So I think in terms of being a part of taking action in this movement, it's kind of like what we were saying earlier. Like, it's easy to get jaded, but you have to hold on to the hope and the optimism and hold on to the victories that are happening, because there are going to be a lot of losses that we experience through this journey.
I think one thing I wanted to mention is like, I think as Asians and Indonesians, I think it's like all the more important to understand, to unlearn all of the different stuff that you have or were brought up with, and like to realize that even though you're not white, you're also potentially contributing to racism, you know, in hiring practices and microaggressions, like the stuff we say. Or just like, I guess, say like the little comments like, oh, the things that I hear for example, like, oh, like, why can't they just be like different, or like whatever. It's just like calling our community out constantly and continually, and losing friends who are,
well, if they're racist,
that's not a loss. It's not a loss.
If they're racist, it's
also,
it's not a loss.
Right, you're also gaining a lot of friends, and I think the approach is, you know, you're calling people out, but it's more of like holding the community accountable and calling the community to hold itself to better standards. Right. So I think like, despite it being very hard, like the idea is we want everyone to be better off. Like, we're not trying to single you out because you're a bad person and you're racist. No, we want you to unlearn and learn and be a better member of society.
I mean, for example, I think one thing I need to learn is like, I don't find it hard to call people out, but I just have that kind of personality. But the thing that I need to learn is to do it more tactfully, given that it's not I'm not a Black person. I'm not affected by it. So I should be more articulate in how I talk about the issue and be like less confrontational and like be more, I don't know. I have a hard time being compassionate and kind in this kind of situation, but just how to like be like more tactful and like reason things out more. I think that's my space. Like, I don't think it's fair. I think like this is one thing that I don't think has been fair is like people are like telling Black people at this time to be kind and compassionate and telling people how to be not racist. And I think it's like, that's not a fair order, tall, like that's a tall order to like ask, right? But for allies, that's I think where we need to step in and be like, okay, this is how we explain the situation with more education instead of like, you racist.
I mean, it's like what you said, Amir. It's not about like closing the door on people. It's actually opening the door for them to realize like, oh, you can be a much better human being.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you realize that there's an opportunity for growth here. It's not just about like single bad guys out, but it's actually really calling into attention the structural racism and the internal racism that has fueled a lot of people's opinions and perspectives, and then telling them, you don't have to think this way. You don't have to behave this way. You can actually be better. You can actually change for the better. And, you know, we've all grown up with certain prejudices and certain attitudes towards things, and we all change. And that's the beauty of being human, right? There's always the next day where you can do something different and you can become someone different.
Right.
And try to keep that momentum alive. And like you said, keep that optimism alive, right? Because this whole thing is not fueled by a desire for like revenge or, you know, retribution or anything. It's actually, like you said, it's fueled for a desire to make everyone better, to make everyone's lives better and make, you know, for a better society. And I think sometimes that is lost in a lot of the media attention and the conversation. And it's good to remind people of that. Like, what is the ultimate end goal here?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's critical. I think another, you know, caveat to that is there are many different goals that different groups of people are trying to achieve. And so that's why in the media, like you said, sometimes it's very dangerous to go down the route of creating this blanket statement about everyone that's taking action right now, because there are so many different stakeholders, there are different advocacy groups, there are people advocating for different things. At the end of the day, it's all towards the idea of making a more equitable society, improving of Black communities. But I think it's important to examine the different goals that are being pursued in the larger movement as well.
And that's not a bad thing. Like, you know, they're having differences in strategies and goals, you know, it's like
there's a lot of things to work on.
Exactly.
Even for those who have, you know, been keeping up with the Black Lives Matter movement and been keeping up with the news, it's not just about that particular news story, right? Or this particular moment in time. It's actually unpacking all the things that have happened beforehand and all the things that we can do in the future. And I think this conversation is really a nice like starting point for a lot of us to begin doing the work.
Amir, is there anything you kind of want to add or say?
I think in general, this idea of it being a marathon and not a sprint is really important. I think as the media attention starts to die down and people start kind of quote unquote resuming their normal social media feeds and all of that, it's important that we continue to hold ourselves and our communities to higher standards. You know, all the different forms of action that we mentioned throughout this conversation, really incorporate that into your own life and really encourage your networks and friends and families to also partake in those actions and continue the energy through the marathon rather than looking at this as a sprint or, you know, just a new trend. And also like support your Black friends, you know, and just like, you know, check in on them and really be that ally that you claim to be.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. You can find more information and resources of whatever we talked about on our website, dialogika.id.
Music credits to John Dealey, Lee Roosevelt, and of course, Broke for Free.
If you like what you hear and want to support us, please review our podcast on the Apple Podcast app or whatever app you use to listen to your podcast. And please share our podcast with your friends. It's the best way to spread the word about Dialogika.
If you want to get more involved, we'd love to hear from you. Our email is dialogikapodcast@gmail.com, or just shoot us a message on our Facebook page.
You can also find us on Instagram, YouTube, SoundCloud, and on Twitter. Please follow us on these various platforms. Our Twitter handle is at Dialogika Pod. Also, follow me on Twitter. It's Steftang. That's STEPHTANGK.
Thank you again, and see you guys next time.
Bye!